1939. A silver screen icon, a proper English gentlewoman, an Academy Award contender. Yet beneath the glamour, she concealed deep blemishes. Her refined dialect covered up her true origins, and her whole identity was a complete fabrication. Merle Oberon actually made history as the very first individual with Asian roots to score an Oscar nod. Nobody had a clue, entirely by her own design. This is the tale of someone who completely obliterated her past just to achieve fame. Ultimately, as her stunning looks started to vanish, so did her world. It all began with a youngster known as Queenie, born on February 19, 1911. She came into the world in Bombay, a place of stark contrasts where the massive wealth of the English Empire sat right next to absolute destitution. Right there in that metropolis, this infant arrived under conditions that would cast a shadow over her entire existence. Official records claim she was the offspring of Charlotte Selby and a railway worker from Wales named Arthur Terence O'Brien Thompson. Reality, however, was way messier. Charlotte was by no means the one who gave birth to her. She was actually the grandma, claiming the kid as hers to cover up a scandalous family secret. The biological mom was really Charlotte's own child, Constance. That teenager was merely 14 years of age when she had the baby. Certain records hint that this conception stemmed from a deeply disturbing incident linked to Charlotte's spouse, Arthur Thompson. The household came to an agreement to bring up the infant as if Charlotte had delivered her, positioning Constance as her sibling instead. The genuine lineage was to be kept strictly under wraps. Though christened Estelle Merle O'Brien Thompson, folks simply referred to her as Queenie, rumored to be a nod to Queen Mary, who toured India alongside King George V during that exact 12-month stretch. The moniker held strong, and throughout her early years, she remained just Queenie Thompson, a kid trying to find her footing in a society that never quite figured out where she belonged. In 1914, right in the middle of World War I, Arthur Thompson passed away. Though he didn't die fighting, but rather caught a fatal case of pneumonia near the Battle of the Somme. The toddler was barely 3 at the time, and his sudden passing plunged Charlotte, Constance, and tiny Queenie straight into financial ruin. The trio bounced between run-down apartments across Bombay, barely making ends meet. Cash was tight, and decent breaks were practically non-existent. The English colonial government enforced a brutal social ladder, leaving folks of blended ancestry stuck right at the very bottom. Fast forward to 1917. The 6-year-old relocated to Calcutta with her relatives, keeping their fingers crossed for a fresh start. It was an enormous, packed metropolis bursting with business and art. Yet, for broke Anglo-Indians, life there wasn't much of a step up from what they'd left behind. Bigotry trailed right behind them, and their broke status never seemed to change. The young girl was an absolute stunner, boasting deep brunette locks and unique facial structures that hinted at her mixed continental roots, alongside a sharp wit that became obvious right away. Even with their empty pockets, Charlotte went out of her way to get the girl into a classroom. She ended up taking classes at La Martiniere College in Calcutta, a highly respected academy, though nobody is quite sure how Charlotte managed to foot the bill. It might have been financial aid, wealthy sponsors, or the kind of grueling personal compromises we could never fully grasp. However, basic academics had their limits. As she hit adolescence, a massive dilemma presented itself. What kind of life could a gorgeous but completely broke, mixed-race teenager actually build in 1920s India? The colonial elites outright refused to hire her for any kind of respectable gig. Tying the knot with an English military man or corporate executive was totally off the table due to her ethnic roots. At the same time, local Indian society kept her at arm's length. Fortunately, as she neared the end of her high school years, the teen realized she possessed one incredibly rare talent. She possessed this magnetic pull over folks. Her aura was undeniable. The second she stepped through a door, all eyes locked onto her. Whenever she took the spotlight, crowds were totally glued to her. Toward the tail end of the 1920s, she started taking roles in community plays with the local drama club in Calcutta. Those gigs barely threw any cash her way, if they paid at all, but they handed her a tiny sneak peek into a brighter future. Every time she hit the theater boards, she turned heads and pulled focus effortlessly. The dramatic arts handed her a rare gift, a community where gorgeous looks and raw skill trumped whatever family tree you came from. Up there under the lights, she was free to invent herself. She morphed into completely different characters, and the crowd ate it up, rewarding her with real applause. As the 1920s wrapped up, the aspiring starlet had morphed into a seriously popular fixture across Kolkata's late-night venues and acting scene. Between her drop-dead gorgeous looks and killer charm, she started realizing that her face might just be her golden ticket out of the slums. The trick was figuring out the logistics. What were the actual options for a girl with her background? Everything shifted during a fateful evening in 1929 at Firpo's dining room. She crossed paths with an ex-performer known as Colonel Ben Finney, who was immediately swept off his feet by her stunning appearance and fierce drive. The two sparked a romance, and he swore up and down that he could get her foot in the door of the movie business. With ties to a filmmaker named Rex Ingram over at Victorine Studios, he offered to hook her up with an audition, provided she was down to pack her bags for Europe. It felt like the ultimate lucky break she'd been praying for. That is, until her beau swung by her apartment one evening and caught a glimpse of Charlotte. The pieces fell into place for him right then and there. Discovering her biracial roots, he pulled the plug on their romance in a heartbeat. Just like everyone else back then, his prejudice blinded him to her potential. Still, you have to hand it to the guy. He actually followed through on hooking her up with that studio connect. Should Queenie agree to travel all the way to French soil, he promised to put in a good word with Ingram. While hardly a guarantee, it represented a glimmer of hope for someone whose existence had been largely devoid of opportunity. Figuring they had absolutely zero downside and a whole new world to conquer, the young girl and Charlotte gathered their things and set off for the French Republic. Upon touching down, they discovered Finney had stayed true to his word and hyped her up to Ingram. The initial offer from Ingram was pretty meager, yet it gave her a foothold. Relocating to Europe meant leaving her Indian roots behind, bringing her one step closer to her ultimate goal, completely remaking her identity. After her time across the Channel, the fiercely ambitious 17-year-old headed straight for London in 1928. Charlotte tagged along, though they passed her off to outsiders as nothing more than a hired servant. They would keep up this heartbreaking charade for years on end. Whenever they were around others, the rising star practically ignored her own guardian, only dropping a few hushed words in Hindi if she absolutely had to. That kind of emotional toll had to be devastating for the pair, yet it was simply the cost of doing business. By the late 1920s, London served as the beating heart of English cinema. Audio technology had recently hit the scene, completely flipping the script from silent movies to modern talkies. Production companies were in an absolute frenzy trying to keep up, desperate for fresh talent whose voices matched their stunning on-screen appearances. Going by the moniker Queenie O'Brien, she snagged a gig hosting at the Café de Paris. The role demanded a gorgeous face, incredible charisma, and a knack for buttering up the elite clientele. She knocked it out of the park, easily capturing the attention of countless male admirers. Despite her destitute origins, she quickly picked up an air of elegance and figured out how to rub elbows with the upper crust. While her evenings were spent hustling at the nightclub, her days were dedicated to prowling around movie lots in search of a lucky break. Eventually, she scored a handful of tiny, uncredited gigs while bouncing between a few different stage names. 1930 saw her land a background spot as a diner patron in the comedy Alf's Button. You'd completely miss her if you looked away for a second. That same year brought a similarly irrelevant extra gig in the W Plan, a frustrating cycle that dragged on through 1930, 1931, and 1932. Her routine consisted of arriving for shoots, dropping a couple of words or blending into the scenery, and getting entirely left out of the final cast list. Projects like For the Love of Mike, Fascination, and Wedding Rehearsal followed suit. Whether it was a minor role in an indie flick or a blip in a blockbuster, she remained totally overlooked. Yet she soaked up knowledge like a sponge. She kept a close eye on the leading ladies, analyzing exactly how they walked, talked, and held their own on camera. The aspiring starlet mentally filed away every detail on what it took to be English royalty on screen, despite making zero actual headway toward nabbing those top spots. It had to be incredibly maddening. She possessed jaw-dropping looks and hustled non-stop, only to constantly spin her wheels in the mud. One can only imagine the sheer number of auditions she attended just to get shown the door. Countless executives likely stared at her striking, ethnically ambiguous features and just could not figure out how to market her. She must have forced hundreds of fake smiles to hide the sting of those rejections. Hovering over it all was her massive secret. The constant, paralyzing dread that some nosy executive might start digging into her past. What was her true hometown? Who were her folks? Did she actually have anyone to vouch for her pedigree? Good looks and acting chops simply weren't going to cut it. She desperately needed a heavy hitter in her corner who was willing to gamble on her potential. That golden opportunity finally knocked in 1932. The visionary Hungarian-born filmmaker Alexander Korda caught sight of her while scouting talent for his fresh venture, London Films. Rumor has it he first noticed her grabbing tea on the lot, while other sources claim their paths crossed during a standard screen test. One thing is for sure, he immediately recognized her star power. Korda was in the middle of constructing an absolute powerhouse of a studio. His grand vision for the English movie scene involved pumping out blockbusters that could go toe-to-toe with the titans in California. Having just relocated from the States, he infused the local industry with a fierce stateside hustle and possessed a sixth sense for spotting genuine A-list talent. Queenie Thompson oozed that exact magnetism. Unfortunately, a girl with her murky origins and a total lack of a refined PR spin simply wasn't box office material. The producer handed her the ultimate golden ticket. An exclusive deal, meaty characters to play, and steady paychecks. The only catch? The identity of Queenie Thompson had to die. An absolute makeover was non-negotiable, starting with a completely fresh moniker that struck the perfect balance between intriguing and approachable. It had to stick in people's minds and give off major upper-crust vibes, without tying her down to a specific lineage. The team ultimately landed on Merle Oberon, a handle that carried an elegant, unique ring, absolutely flawless for marquee idol. The first name flowed beautifully off the tongue, while the surname served as a highbrow nod to the famous fairy ruler from Shakespearean lore. Next up was fabricating her history, a step that honestly held more weight than figuring out what to call her. Throughout the 1930s, the entertainment business on both sides of the pond was handcuffed by intense, racially motivated regulations. The infamous American Hays Code, slated for an official rollout in 1934, was pretty much already calling the shots behind the scenes, strictly outlawing any on-screen romance across different ethnicities. The guidelines explicitly defined miscegenation as intimate relations between white and black individuals, treating any hint of it as grounds to permanently ban a project from theaters. On top of all that, audiences back then outright rejected non-white actors in leading romantic parts. Seeing an actress with Eurasian roots sharing an on-screen kiss with a Caucasian star would have sparked absolute outrage. Cinema managers across both the United States and the United Kingdom simply wouldn't have screened those movies. Moviegoers would have rioted in the streets. A stunning Anglo-Indian actress had zero chance at stardom. However, an attractive Caucasian lady hailing from the outskirts of the empire? People could tolerate that. In fact, they found it fascinating. Therefore, the studio concocted a meticulous fabrication. Merle Oberon hailed from Tasmania, down in Australia. Executives figured this island off the Australian coast was the absolute farthest corner of the British territories, away from the prying eyes of London and California. Its sheer isolation practically guaranteed that nobody was going to fact-check her background. The location sounded properly English to maintain her dignity, yet it carried an untamed, rugged vibe, where missing paperwork felt completely expected. Their manufactured biography claimed she belonged to an affluent English clan. Her dad was supposedly a military commander who perished during a disastrous childhood hunting trip, prompting her relocation to India to stay with her chosen guardians. This neat little excuse perfectly justified her ties to the subcontinent without actually making her a native. These surrogate parents supposedly handled her schooling, manners, and overall refinement. Then they added the ultimate failsafe. A devastating blaze had conveniently wiped out every trace of her original documentation. Sure, it sounded heartbreaking, but it effectively bulletproofed her history against any nosy reporters. Absolutely nobody could debunk the narrative. Plus, why would they even try when her appearance fit the bill so flawlessly? Thanks to intense speech coaching, her voice matched the illusion entirely, and production executives threw their full weight behind the lie. This falsehood held just enough water to survive intense prodding, while Merle took rigorous dialect classes to polish her pronunciation. She mastered the walk, the talk, and the complete aura of English high society. Then, in 1933, Corda handed her the breakthrough part that skyrocketed her into the limelight. She was cast as Anne Boleyn in The Private Life of Henry VIII, acting alongside Charles Laughton. The movie became a massive blockbuster. It made history as the very first picture out of the United Kingdom to score an Oscar nod for the top prize. And although her screen time was brief, she left an unforgettable mark. Viewers were captivated by her striking features and aristocratic presence as the ill-fated royal, instantly transforming Merle Oberon into a household name. New gigs piled up fast, including a spot in The Private Life of Don Juan during 1934, co-starring with Douglas Fairbanks. That same year brought The Scarlet Pimpernel, where she shared the screen with Leslie Howard. Gorgeous, highly skilled, and fiercely sought after, she kept up the charade about her past the entire time. Nobody raised an eyebrow. There was simply no reason to. Yet her hidden reality trailed right behind her, embodied by Charlotte, who stayed constantly in the shadows, acting as her hired help. On the scarce occasions they stepped out together, Merle conversed with her strictly in Hindi to keep the grand illusion intact. The sheer harshness of this setup, constantly pretending not to know the woman who nurtured her, surely took a massive emotional toll on both women. However, Charlotte accepted the situation gracefully. She had spent forever giving things up for this young woman, making this just another cross to bear. Meanwhile, her actual mother, Constance, had tied the knot and birthed 4 additional kids over in India: Edna, Douglas, Harry, and Stanislaus. Those siblings grew up believing Merle was their aunt, completely oblivious to the fact that she was truly their half-sister. This tangled knot of lies only became more convoluted as the decades rolled on. Down the line, a few family members would attempt to unearth the facts. But at that moment, the cover-up remained rock solid. The entire entertainment industry was watching her every move, leading up to 1939, when she scored the absolute pinnacle role of her acting journey. Before reaping those rewards, though, she had to survive one of the toughest workplace dynamics she would ever face. Wuthering Heights was officially in the works, bankrolled by Samuel Goldwyn, with William Wyler sitting in the director's chair. Playing Cathy Earnshaw, the fiery, tragic leading lady of Emily Bronte's classic book, was arguably the hottest ticket in show business. Countless stars fought tooth and nail for the spot, while Wyler harbored specific visions for his lineup, having already secured the highly respected stage veteran Laurence Olivier to portray Heathcliff. The esteemed actor strongly advocated for his own choice of leading lady, fiercely pushing for Vivian Leigh, the woman he was heavily involved with romantically at the time. Once the studio locked in Merle instead, Olivier didn't hide his fury for a second, acting incredibly stubborn during production and constantly throwing sharp insults her way. He second-guessed her every artistic choice on camera, doing whatever he could to shake her self-esteem. Considering she was already lugging around the massive weight of a fabricated persona, Battling a toxic scene partner had to be completely draining. Yet the moment the director yelled action, absolute lightning struck. Regardless of his private grudges, Olivier's elite training took over, while Merle tapped into deep vulnerabilities she usually kept hidden, creating a cinematic masterpiece that completely eclipsed their behind-the-scenes feuding. The dynamic between the two actors simply radiated from the screen. Every moment Cathy and Heathcliff shared was bursting with raw heartache and intense desire. As the heroine confesses that her lover's soul and hers are one and the same, Merle's absolutely convincing performance sells every word of it. Hearing her desperately cry out for him on her deathbed feels genuinely agonizing. The movie dominated at the box office and absolutely wowed the reviewers. Hitting theaters in 1939, right around the time the actress tied the knot with Alexander Korda, this picture went down in history as an absolute masterpiece of romantic cinema. Even now, folks regard this motion picture as an unparalleled triumph in bringing a famous novel to life on the big screen. While Merle's portrayal of Cathy stands as the absolute pinnacle of her acting career, truly reaching for the stars. Around 1935, the rising starlet had solidly landed on Hollywood's radar. Industry heavyweight Samuel Goldwyn stepped up and handed her a major studio deal. Relocating to America, she took the leading lady spot alongside Frederick March in The Dark Angel, which turned out to be an incredibly fitting gig. Cast as a grieving partner convinced her beloved perished during the First World War, her character eventually finds out he actually lived through the conflict, but lost his sight. Packed with heavy drama and raw feeling, the role allowed Merle to knock it out of the park, leaving both reviewers and moviegoers completely captivated. She earned a Best Actress Oscar nod back in 1936, firmly establishing the 25-year-old as a genuine Tinseltown sensation. A secret kept under wraps for decades following her passing was the monumental fact that she was actually the very first performer of Asian heritage to ever receive an Academy Award nomination. Hitting the big time naturally opened plenty of new doors. She kept incredibly busy, consistently landing parts in top-tier studio pictures. She tackled 3 major features in 1936, including Beloved Enemy, making her an incredibly hot commodity on the studio lots. However, that massive fame came with a heavy dose of public snooping. Journalists were practically knocking down her door to dig up every detail about the stunning starlet. Which exact part of Tasmania did she hail from? Who were her folks? Would she consider doing a massive press tour back in Australia? Every single inquiry felt incredibly dangerous, forcing her to become a master at dodging the press by giving lengthy chats that basically said nothing at all. She'd just flash a bright grin and seamlessly steer the conversation somewhere else. Her go-to excuse was a massive falling out with her Australian kin, claiming ignorance about her roots. And if journalists pushed too hard, she'd act incredibly foggy or even fake sickness. Across the pond in the United Kingdom, her bond with Alexander Korda grew much stronger as the two constantly collaborated on sets. The filmmaker essentially managed her trajectory, getting her in the room with all the heavy hitters, though any whispered love affairs were complicated by the fact that he already had a wife. Right from the jump, their dynamic was incredibly messy. Mixing business with private matters turned everything up to 11, right before a massive disaster in 1937 almost derailed her whole life. That horrible crash happened in March 1937. Over in London, the actress was right in the middle of filming a movie meant to be her crowning achievement. She played Empress Messalina alongside Charles Laughton in the Joseph von Sternberg picture I, Claudius. Putting the movie together involved massive sets and a ballooning budget, plagued by constant headaches from day one. While riding through the British capital on March 16, 1937, her vehicle got completely smashed into by another driver. The crash left her with severe gashes all over her neck, behind her ears, and straight across her face, though the early news bulletins tried to sweep the damage under the rug. The papers ran stories claiming she'd bounce right back without a single permanent blemish. PR. Spin doctors scrambled to manage the fallout, hiding the terrifying truth that her livelihood, built entirely around her stunning looks, was hanging by a thread. She was left dealing with prominent scarring that heavy cosmetics and clever shadows could perhaps soften, but fundamentally never erase. By March 26th, a mere 10 days following the tragic wreck, the studio officially pulled the plug on the I, Claudius shoot. On paper, her severe wounds caused the shutdown, but the actual story had plenty more layers. The set was already a nightmare, filled with clashing egos and massive friction between the director and his leading man. Plenty of insiders suspect the producer simply weaponized the tragic crash to kill off a totally doomed picture. Either way, the movie never made it to the cutting room. Many years down the line, a British television special titled The Epic That Never Was aired the salvaged clips, giving audiences a heartbreaking peek at a brilliant piece of cinema that could have been. The physical trauma threw her into an absolute tailspin, forcing her to see a string of top doctors who warned that her deep blemishes could only be faded, not cured. From that point forward, every cinematographer she ever worked with had to use customized lighting setups. On top of everything else, a totally different nightmare was brewing. Fast forward to 1940, and her complexion took another massive hit, supposedly triggered by a toxic mix of heavy makeup and a terrible reaction to sulfa medications. However, a few historians argue that these brutal side effects actually stemmed from secret treatments aimed at making her skin look significantly whiter. Keeping her mixed-race roots a secret meant she felt immense pressure to look incredibly fair-skinned. Alexander Korda flew her out to New York to get medical help. She endured agonizing skin resurfacing treatments that barely worked. Her face was permanently altered. If she wasn't wearing foundation, you could clearly see the deep marks and blemishes left behind. Still, Merle had an iron will. This was a woman who had already beaten extreme hardship, racism, a massive move across the globe, and completely faking her past. She wasn't about to let this defeat her. And the fix arrived from someone completely out of the blue. They called it the Obie light. Lucian Ballard happened to be a brilliant, forward-thinking cameraman who started shooting her movies, like The Lodger back in 1944, and he instantly figured out the issue. Her facial damage, the blotchy complexion, and the demand for flawless illumination all required a fix, which he managed to build himself. He rigged up a compact lamp right onto the lens, pointing it straight at the actor's features to hit them dead center. That bright beam completely blurred out any flaws, softened her complexion, and gave her a radiant aura, earning the nickname the Obie in her honor. Show business quickly adopted this trick as an industry norm. Film crews still rely on it now, even if almost nobody knows it was originally whipped up just to mask her blemishes. That clever invention from Ballard single-handedly rescued her acting trajectory. It also ignited a love affair. By 1945, Merle ended her 6-year union with Alexander Korda. That very June, she tied the knot with Lucian Ballard. The guy who practically painted her flawlessly onto the silver screen was now her spouse. Things with Korda had always been rocky. He bossed her around, cheated on her, and their dynamic felt way more like a corporate merger than an actual romance. After he received a knighthood in 1942, she officially transformed into Lady Korda, finally reaching the upper crust status she had spent her life faking. However, fancy titles couldn't fix a toxic partnership, whereas things with Ballard felt like a breath of fresh air. He truly grasped how fragile she felt inside. The man had literally dedicated his entire professional skill set to making sure she looked flawless. Plus, there was a certain beauty in a lady whose whole persona relied on looks, hitching herself to the very person running the camera. Still, this relationship was destined to fail as well. They called it quits by 1949, and while the exact details stayed secret, a clear trend was forming. She just couldn't manage to nail down any sort of permanent joy behind closed doors. At the same time, her time in the spotlight was hitting a rough patch, the dreaded downward spiral. The 1940s kept her incredibly booked. She starred in 15 pictures over those 10 years, with a handful doing quite well. A Song to Remember from 1945 really killed it at the box office, featuring her as the French author Georges Sand alongside Cornel Wilde as Chopin. Audiences loved Berlin Express in 1948. Yet plenty of her other projects just kind of faded into the background. Movies like Night Song in 1947 and Temptation in 1946 proved hit or miss, and worryingly, the acting gigs started drying up. Show business was going through a massive shift during the late 1940s and throughout the 1950s. Fresh, young talent was flooding the scene. The sweeping, emotional love stories she was famous for weren't popular anymore. And despite looking gorgeous, she was now over 40 in a town that practically worshipped youth. Once Berlin Express wrapped in 1948, she vanished from the screen for 4 whole years, making her 1952 comeback in Pardon My French feel incredibly glaring. She shot Desiree in 1954, taking on the role of Empress Josephine, while Marlon Brando played Napoleon. It was a massive, high-budget picture, yet it totally failed to jumpstart her momentum, and her breaks between jobs stretched out even more. 0 movies in 1955. She snagged a single TV presenting gig in 1956 for Assignment Foreign Legion, followed by absolute zilch in 1957, 1958, 1959, 1960, 1961, or 1962. Total crickets. One of the biggest names in the entertainment capital was essentially vanishing into thin air. Right in the middle of this career slump in 1957, she shook up her private life in a major way. She walked down the aisle with an Italian-born manufacturing tycoon named Bruno Pagliai. This marked her 3rd trip to the altar, and interestingly enough, her new man had 0 ties to the movie business. She was leaving the cinematic world behind on multiple fronts, going on to adopt 2 kids, Bruno Jr. and Francesca, with her new husband. The family settled down in Cuernavaca, Mexico, inside a genuinely stunning mansion, as she completely immersed herself in an entirely new daily routine. She transitioned into a high society entertainer, hosting lavish get-togethers, buying up fine art, and designing gorgeous properties that showed off her incredible eye for style. Yet deep down, she remained the exact same celebrity who was terrified of letting her mask slip, forever carrying the crushing weight of her lifelong deception. The woman who actually brought her up, her grandma, Charlotte Selby, had passed away back in 1937, only a few months after that terrible auto wreck. Using a vintage picture for reference, she paid artists to paint portraits of Charlotte and put them up in every single house she owned. Curiously enough, the artwork always depicted her grandmother with a significantly lighter complexion than she actually had in real life. Merle couldn't stop rewriting her own history, even within her own mind. It was her ultimate gamble. Stepping back in front of the camera in 1963, after a 6-year hiatus, she starred in Of Love and Desire, which wrapped production down in Mexico. Her comeback, however, fell entirely flat. Audiences completely ignored the lackluster movie, even though she had actually filmed portions of it right on her own property. Fast forward 4 years to 1967, and she snagged a part in Hotel, joining a star-studded lineup to bring Arthur Haley's book to the big screen. The picture barely made a splash, and her part was essentially a background piece. Merle had already hit her 50s at this point. Tinseltown simply wasn't handing out compelling scripts to older actresses anymore. Still, she managed to pull together one last gig, and looking back, it mirrored her reality in an eerie way. Down in Mexico, back in 1973, she both bankrolled and headlined a picture called Interval. The plot centered around an aging lady falling head over heels for a guy significantly her junior. Sharing the screen with her was a 36-year-old talent from the Netherlands, Robert Wolders. Since she was 62 at the time, fiction basically became reality. The leading lady and her handsome co-star ended up getting together while the cameras were rolling. That same year, 1973, marked the end of her 16-year union with Bruno Pagliai, as they officially called it quits. 2 years later, in 1975, she tied the knot for the 4th and last time, saying her vows to Wolders, despite their 25-year age gap. People close to the couple noticed how utterly dedicated he was to her. His affection felt incredibly real, giving Merle a profound sense of tranquility she had likely never experienced before. The newlyweds packed up and headed to Malibu, California, trading the chaotic glitz of the entertainment business for a peaceful, laid-back existence. Yet the shadows of her hidden past refused to fade away. When 1978 rolled around, a specific event shattered her carefully constructed reality entirely. The facade finally crumbled. Alexander Corder's nephew, a well-regarded author and publisher named Michael Corder, stepped into the picture. He released a tell-all book titled Charmed Lives in 1979, diving deep into the family history of his renowned uncles and the women they married. Because she had married into the family, she ended up being a massive focal point of the biography. And Michael had definitely done his homework. He had uncovered the real facts of her upbringing, and even though he attempted to tread lightly, the manuscript exposed where she actually came from. It sent her into an absolute rage. She promised to drag him into court over it. Word on the street is she even went as far as striking him out of her estate plans completely. The sheer thought of her lifelong deception seeing the light of day shook her to her core. Every single thing she had achieved was resting on that fabricated story. Her professional success, her romantic relationships, and her very sense of self were all fake. How would the public react? During 1978, she and Robert took a trip down to Hobart, Tasmania. Her husband simply wanted to check out the town where she claimed she was born. That turned out to be a massive blunder. Local reporters swarmed her, eager to hear hometown memories from the island's most glamorous native star, hounding her for specific stories about her early years. She completely froze up. Panic set in, making her physically sick right in the middle of a special event thrown to celebrate her. Overwhelmed by the intense grilling she couldn't fake her way through, the dam finally broke, and she confessed that she wasn't a Tasmanian native after all, before instantly passing out. Everyone heard the bombshell confession. Her cover was permanently blown, leaving the iconic actress who had burned countless hours keeping up the elaborate charade, completely drained of the energy needed to sustain the illusion. The story concluded on November 23, 1979, out in Malibu, California. A devastating stroke struck the legendary star. She was 68 at the time, with her devoted husband right by her side. She passed away before the day was over on that fateful November 23rd, inside their shared residence. They laid her to rest over at the Forest Lawn Memorial Park Cemetery, located in Glendale, California. Her memorial service drew a modest crowd of loved ones, relatives, and a handful of veteran insiders who remembered her from the classic studio era. The attendees paid their respects to the stunning leading lady, the former Lady Corder, who had captivated audiences in Wuthering Heights. Yet nobody truly knew the woman they were burying. Who was the real person behind the makeup? Once she was gone, historians started connecting the dots. When the British Library kicked off an initiative to scan old colonial archives from India, a certain birth certificate popped up. The proof was staring right at them. It listed Estelle Merle O'Brien Thompson, brought into the world on February 19, 1911, straight out of Bombay, miles away from Tasmania. Those documents she swore burned up in a tragic blaze had actually survived just fine. Slowly but surely, the real narrative took shape, featuring her teenage mom, a grandmother who pretended the baby was hers, the tough times scraping by in Calcutta, the massive trek across the globe to Europe, and the carefully calculated invention of an entirely new persona. This meant the screen legend was actually the very first talent with Asian roots to ever score an Oscar nod, yet she died without ever celebrating that incredible milestone, purely because she wasted her whole existence hiding the very background that made the achievement so special. By 1985, Michael Corder dropped a novel called Queenie, which was basically a loosely disguised retelling of his aunt's life. That book eventually got the Hollywood treatment itself, turning into a massive multi-part series for television. The cat was officially out of the bag, sparking endless debates, think pieces, page-turners, and deep-dive films. A deep-dive film called The Trouble with Merle hit screens in 2002, digging into the tangled web of her fake backstories. Relatives who grew up believing the actress was their aunt were shocked to learn they actually shared the same mother. The massive cover-up impacted several branches of her family tree, proving just how heavy the burden of a flawless image really was. When you look at her legacy today, it is incredibly easy to criticize the lifelong con. She kept the charade going for 50 years, turning her back on the woman who gave birth to her. She spun an incredibly detailed web of fiction about her life, keeping up the charade long past the point of sheer exhaustion. Yet you have to look at her reality. Coming into the world in 1911, she was handed a life of destitution and tough breaks right from the start. She was raised in a culture that held deep prejudice against multiracial individuals, facing constant rejection from the English for lacking a pure white background. At the same time, the local Indian community shunned her for her mixed roots, leaving her completely isolated until she realized her stunning features were her only real advantage. Her looks were absolutely breathtaking. They offered a potential escape route, provided she was willing to completely reinvent her identity. During the 1930s, the entertainment industry simply did not allow women of Anglo-Indian descent to achieve fame. The Hays Code strictly banned mixed-race relationships in movies, while United States borders were legally closed to Indian migrants, simultaneously blocking citizenship for any who had already arrived. From the film business to everyday society, the whole framework was intentionally built to keep women of her background completely shut out. Therefore, she made a calculated decision. Transform into Merle Oberon, the gorgeous girl from Tasmania, and gain the world. The alternative was staying Queenie Thompson and staying broke. She went with self-preservation and a chance at success, which undeniably meant turning her back on her true heritage. Honestly, what other options did she possess? The heartbreaking irony is that her physical attractiveness unlocked the doors to high society, yet, simultaneously, became her ultimate prison. Growing older naturally wasn't an option, since losing her youth meant directly losing her worth in the business. Coming clean about her roots was out of the question, as the truth would instantly shatter the entire life she built. She was even forced to hide her affection for Charlotte, her own mother figure, just to avoid blowing her cover. While Lucien Ballard created that special camera light to mask her facial injuries, Merle actually went through her whole existence relying on a metaphorical spotlight of her own, meticulously crafting an illusion to keep her real identity in the shadows. The marks left by that 1937 car crash were merely surface deep. Makeup and clever filming angles could easily conceal them. However, the emotional damage of constantly disowning her true self, her maternal figure, and her past, that kind of pain stayed permanently open. That inner turmoil went way beyond the fix of any Hollywood cinematography trick. It left behind a tremendously tangled footprint in history. In 1960, she was honored with a brass star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, placed exactly at 6,274 Hollywood Boulevard. Tourists stroll right over it today, completely clueless about the complex individual it represents. Her movie catalog survives, with Wuthering Heights still standing as an absolute cinematic masterpiece. Playing Kathy alongside Laurence Olivier as Heathcliff cemented her legacy in one of the silver screen's most phenomenal tales of doomed love. Works like The Dark Angel, The Scarlet Pimpernel, and A Song to Remember endure as well. All of those projects are firmly etched into movie lore. Yet her incredible career heights will always carry the heavy baggage of her lifelong deception. After Michelle Yeoh took home the Best Actress Oscar in 2023, media outlets argued over how to properly frame the historic moment. Several publications labeled her the initial Asian woman to claim the trophy. A few other outlets decided to throw in specific conditions to their headlines. They specified the first openly Asian winner, noting that while Merle had earned a nomination previously, she actively hid her heritage until her dying day. That is a truly heartbreaking asterisk to hold. Had things been different, she might have been hailed as an incredible pioneer for diversity. Rather, history views her as someone who lived in the shadows, though she only did so because facing the truth meant career suicide. Her journey forces us to confront some really tough truths regarding the entertainment business, physical appearance, and racial background. How are we supposed to interpret a society where a person literally has to wipe out their own roots just to make it to the top? What kind of reflection is that on a studio system and a general public that demanded that level of self-destruction? At the end of the day, she wasn't some evil mastermind, nor was she a flawless champion. She was simply a human being doing whatever it took to stay afloat in an environment with virtually zero safety nets. She leaned entirely on her looks, her sharp mind, and sheer willpower, ultimately enduring a massive personal toll that we can hardly even comprehend. She even brushed shoulders with the British elite after earning the title of Lady Corda. She basked in absolute wealth, walked down the aisle 4 separate times, welcomed adopted kids into her home, and toured the globe. On paper, she totally won at life, yet she was permanently robbed of living authentically. She spent her whole life forcing the woman who brought her up to pretend to be nothing but the hired help. She completely missed out on the honor of being recognized as the initial Asian talent to score an Academy Award nomination. She took her secrets to the grave, slowly slipping from the spotlight. In many ways, her professional trajectory and personal journey mirrored a classic Hollywood cliché. A spectacular climb fueled by gorgeous features and acting chops, hitting the absolute pinnacle of stardom. That was followed by a gradual decline as her youthful glow vanished and casting directors looked elsewhere. For her, though, that decline wasn't just about losing movie roles. It was a total unraveling of her core being. Once her signature looks started to fade, the shield they offered vanished too. Keeping up the massive charade got incredibly tough as the media's digging grew far more aggressive. The sheer mental stamina needed to sustain her fake backstory became an exhausting burden that multiplied with every single birthday. When she finally came clean about everything in Tasmania back in 1978, she had already hit 67 years of age. She spent almost 50 years portraying the fictional, gorgeous Tasmanian starlet. Unloading that secret ultimately seemed to shatter her spirit entirely. Merely 12 months after that, she passed away. Robert Walters, the man by her side during those final days, eventually went on to date Audrey Hepburn. He clearly had a type, stunningly gorgeous women with incredibly intricate lives. Whenever reporters brought up his time with her, he only ever shared words full of deep fondness and high regard. Knowing all the hidden details of her past never stopped him from giving her his whole heart. That unconditional support is likely what gave Merle a sense of tranquility during her twilight years. The little girl who started out in Bombay as Queenie Thompson managed to conquer unimaginable boundaries. She escaped a life of crushing hardship and severe prejudice to reach the absolute pinnacle of silver screen stardom. She traded the impoverished streets of Calcutta for high society gatherings with English aristocrats, transforming herself from a complete unknown into a legendary cinematic icon. Every single goal she ever chased eventually landed right in the palm of her hand. Yet, when her time finally came, she simply slipped into the shadows like a film reel rolling to a close, leaving behind nothing but captured memories. And those surviving snapshots are still absolutely breathtaking today. Watching Merle Oberon on camera means seeing a flawlessly illuminated star, someone who expertly masked every single blemish, whether it was a physical mark or a wound buried deep within her soul. Her striking looks kick-started an empire, built entirely on a massive deception that would eventually come to light. Despite being the very first performer of Asian descent to score an Oscar nomination, she spent her whole life running from that historic milestone. Ultimately, she was a fierce fighter navigating an unforgiving era by making incredibly brutal personal sacrifices. Craving society's approval more than anything else, she quickly realized the only way through the door meant completely erasing her true identity. Merle Oberon rubbed elbows with monarchs and made a home among Hollywood elites. However, once her youthful glow vanished and the spotlights turned off, she quietly stepped away, taking her deepest secrets right into the ground with her. It was not until long after she passed away that the general public finally discovered her actual roots. Sadly, by the time those facts surfaced, she was no longer around to experience the sheer liberation of living out loud. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you loved this deep dive. That way you will always catch our next incredible historical journey.